Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 6th of May of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where we see that most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians rejected the ceasefire that was proposed by the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, during the 4th of May of 2026. First, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andrei Sybiga, confirmed this information this morning. He stated that Russia violated the ceasefire initiated by Ukraine at midnight between May 5th and 6th. And later, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, also confirmed this information. He said that assault operations are ongoing on all key areas of the front, and since the beginning of this day alone, the Russian army had already carried out almost 30 assault operations. More than 20 airstrikes with more than 70 air bombs have been recorded just last night and this morning. So with this big statement, Zelensky also confirmed that Ukraine doesn't see any ceasefire during the 8th and the 9th of May of 2026, especially in the area of the city of Moscow, in the capital of the Russian Federation. But there is one important thing that I would like to point to attention. Despite all these statements made by the Ukrainian authorities, despite all these attacks and strikes that were carried out by Russians and the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours, there is one important thing, and the thing is the Russians don't change their mind. The Russians announced a ceasefire between the 8th and the 9th of May of 2026, and most likely we'll see this ceasefire. This is going to be one-sided ceasefire from the Russian side. Most likely the Ukrainians will not join this process, and this ceasefire will take place. Most likely during the 8th and the 9th of May of 2026, the Russians will not carry out massive missile and drone strikes. We can say the same thing about the Ukrainian side, because just during the previous 36 hours, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, changed his mind maybe 2 or 3 times, and nobody can guarantee that Zelensky will not change his mind for another 2 or 3 times before the 8th of May of 2026. So today is already the end of the 6th of May. Tomorrow is the last day before the beginning of the Russian ceasefire, and the next upcoming night is going to be very important, because the next night will give us insight and the understanding how exactly the 8th and the 9th of May will pass. At the same time, of course, the Russians are trying to stay on the safe side, and the sources stated that the government of the Russian region of Kamchatka has confirmed that missile tests have begun at the Kura test range. According to the regional authorities, these exercises are scheduled to take place from May 6th to May 10th. The Kurga range, located about 500 kilometers north of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, and is a primary site for testing impact accuracy for missiles launched from the western Russia. Authorities have strictly prohibited movement and equipment in the area for the duration of the tests. These drills follow a series of modernizations in Russia's nuclear triad, including the rearmament of missiles formations with YARS system. So the Russians began nuclear tests, and furthermore, another important thing is that yesterday we received a report, more precisely the day before yesterday, we received a report that the Russians have closed the airspace over the Kapustin Yar, and this is the launching site that the Russians used to attack with Oreshnik systems. So as you can see, both the western and the eastern parts of the Russian Federation are ready to use the most modern and the most important and powerful weapons the Russians have right now. And most likely during the 9th of May, the Russians will try to introduce the Western countries, the NATO countries, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States of America, the capabilities of the new Russian weapons that most likely we'll see during the 9th of May. And telling the truth, everything is possible during these days. Furthermore, and most likely, the Ukrainians will attack the territory of the Russian Federation between the 8th and the 9th of May of 2026. And the sources stated that everything is possible. And according to information we have, the Russians are preparing a massive attack between the 10th and the 12th of May. So the Russians will not attack Ukraine with hundreds, maybe thousands of drones and hundreds of missiles during these days, but during the 10th or between 10th and the 12th of May, everything is possible. But of course, everything depends on the Ukrainian behavior during these days. If everything goes wrong, then most likely between 10th and the 12th of May of 2026, we'll see indeed thousands of drones, hundreds of missiles, and probably a couple of Oreshnik systems.
I gave a little bit. I gave a little bit of my life for you.
Sunset Boulevard har været i danske hænder siden 1996.
Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next, but now let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction where the Russians continue offensive operation. We have small changes through the entire line of combat contact. And first, let's talk about the settlement of Sopich. This is basically the most northern parts of the Sumy region. And we have changes. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. As you can see, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions to the west of the settlement of Sopich towards the settlement of Bachevsk. This is the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians using FPV drones were attacking Russians that were trying to move in this area. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and based on this video, we came to the conclusion that the Russians, after a very long operational pause, decided to resume their offensive operations. Now let's talk about the original Sumy direction. During the previous day, lots of explosions were recorded on the territory of Sumy. The Russians were attacking the city with Geran drones. In this video, we can see the moments when the Russians attacked the settlement during the previous day. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions in the southeastern direction of the settlement of Krasnopolye. And this information was provided by neutral mappers. We have the Russian offensive operation in this area. If you remember, during the previous 3 days, the Russians improved their position significantly, and it seems that in coming days, and most likely tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, right before the Russian ceasefire, will confirm Russian control over the settlements of Ryasne, and probably will see a video from the settlement of Miropolye with the Russian flags. So I believe that both either tomorrow or the 6th, the 7th of May, or the day after tomorrow, the 8th of May, would be something like the Russian Day flag, when we'll see hundreds of flags raised by Russians along the entire line of combat contact. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of attacks, lots of explosions were also recorded in this area. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see a very heavy explosion somewhere in the northern parts of the city of Kharkiv, and we can see the secondary detonation. So it seems that the Russians destroyed a warehouse, and then we could see how the ammo was exploding. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation in the area of the settlement of Kazachye Lopань. We have small changes on the ground in this area. A video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources of how Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area. So now the Russians are trying to improve the buffer zone to the north and to the northwest of the city of Kharkiv. As for the northeastern Kharkiv direction, here we have also small changes. The Russians improved their positions in the area of the settlement of Badarki. So these are the changes that were made based on the video that was also published by pro-Ukrainian sources. Here we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians right exactly through the eastern parts of the settlement. And these are the changes on the ground. Not so big, but the most important thing is that the Russians continue advancing. As for the Veliki Burluk direction, here we have changes as well. And as for these changes, this information today was provided by several very reliable pro-Russian sources. And according to these changes, the Russians began advancing in the direction of the settlement by the name of Vilkhuvatka. This is a very important village that connects basically the Veliki Burluk, Bely Kolodets settlements and the most northeastern part of Kharkiv region. If Russians, as a result of offensive operation, are able to take under complete control these villages and this territory under complete control, then of course the Ukrainians from the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv region will begin suffering huge problems with supply and logistics. As for the Kupian's direction and as for the Borova direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. We had just several updates that the Russians are fighting for the settlement of Borova and that the clashes are taking place on the territory of the settlement, but yet we haven't received anything that can confirm this. So several reliable pro-Russian sources are saying that there are already clashes for the settlement, but as you can see, we have no proofs to confirm this.
Er du klar på en til? Husk, at du med indbetalingsflex fra AP Pension selv bestemmer, hvor meget du indbetaler til pensionen, hvis du nu lige skulle få brug for lidt luft i økonomien.
Hos AP Pension er vi altid med dig hele vejen.
The Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The most important updates we received during the previous 3 days when the Russians published lots of videos of how they managed to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Seversky Donetsk between the villages of Tatianovka and Prishep. Based on these videos, we adjusted the map yesterday. As of the 6th of May of 2026, we haven't received anything special from this area. But we have changes to the east of the city of Slaviansk. The Russians continue pushing the Ukrainians in this area. The situation is very critical for the armed forces of Ukraine. Every single supply and support line is under complete Russian fire and probably sometimes even physical control. The Ukrainians have huge problems to bring additional and fresh forces to the line of combat contact. The Russians establish complete control over the territory. Furthermore, it seems that the clashes for the settlement of Kriva Luka is entering its major and decisive phase, and if Ukrainians lose control over the settlement of Kriva Luka, which most likely will happen during the next 3 or 4 weeks, then the Russians will be able to begin advancing further from strategic elevations in the direction of the settlement of Nikolaevka. The city of Konstantinovka, we have lots of important changes and important updates. The Russians intensify their attacks with aviation through the territory between the settlements of Drushkovka and Kramatorsk. In this picture, we can see a very heavy explosion, very heavy fire and black smoke after the Russians attacked the city of Drushkovka with aviation. Here we can see probably the same moment, but from another angle. The sources stated that the Russians destroyed a warehouse or an ammo depot on the territory of the settlement, which means that some forces along the line of combat contact will not receive proper supply and support during the Russian offensives. Furthermore, a very heavy explosion was recorded on the territory of the city of Kramatorsk. Here we can see the consequences of attack. So as you can see, both cities still have civilians and population. The Ukrainians are leaving these territories, but lots of civilians remain in this area. And the Russians continue offensive operation through the city of Konstantinovka. As we discussed during the previous video, by the end of the 6th of May of 2026, the Russians have established control for more than 28 or even 29% of the city, and the Russians continue advancing deeper inside of the central part of the settlement. So we have a very huge infiltrated area and the gray zone through the western parts of the city of Konstantinovka. It seems that the Ukrainians control just several micro districts along the river of Krivoy Tarets, but from this configuration of the front line, we believe that within a week this map would be adjusted and changed significantly, and most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area towards the northern parts of the city with the purpose to hold the city for as long as possible along the river and through the eastern front line. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians suddenly and unexpectedly began offensive operation between the cities of Dobropolye and Drushkovka. And as you can see, we have huge changes on the ground. So this is the situation by the end of the 5th of May, and this is the situation by the end of the 6th of May. The Russians improved their positions around the village of Vilna, and the Russians approached the settlement of Styope. The Russians have encircled the settlement of Kucherov Yar from the southwest and from the northeast, and the Russians improved their positions in the direction of the villages of Novonikolaevka, Gruskaya, Veselin, Zolotoy Kolodis. So the Russians are doing everything they used to do during the August and September of 2025, when the Russians were already attacking in this area. And almost a year ago, we saw the same picture. The Russians were trying to infiltrate as far as possible in the northern direction with the purpose to cut the TO514 roads between the cities of Dobropolye and Kramatorsk-Drushkovka. Now the Russians are planning and are trying to do the same. The Russians will continue offensive operation, and the Russians are tasked most likely to establish complete control over these territories. So these are the fields, villages, fortifications between the settlements of Dovga, Balka, Drushkovka, Vladimirovka, Shakhov, Dobropilye, and Belitskaya. If Russians, as a result of offensive operation, are able to establish complete control over these territories between the settlements of Dobropolye, Drushkovka, and Kramatorsk, and if it happens, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of the Ukraine's defense through the entire Donetsk region, because from this configuration of the front line, the Russians will be able to fight with every single pocket, with every single direction separately. The Russians, most likely in coming hours or probably after the end of the May holidays, will intensify their attempts to move in this direction significantly. This will allow the Russians, using the foothold behind the cities of Kramatorsk and Drushkovka, to attack the main positions of the armed forces of Ukraine from behind, from those positions where the Ukrainians don't expect the Russians are able to do this.
Hello.
Go! Ethan, run! Go! Go! Go, go, go!
Don't you want to play? I have a surprise for you.
Oral-B ved, at uanset hvilke tænder du har, fortjener din perfekt og skånsom rengøring. Oral-B's runde børstehud tilpasser sig til dine tænder og renser, hvor manuelle tandbørster ikke kan komme til, og masserer dit tandkød. For 100% renere tænder og sundere tandkød. Oplev IoT, vores hidtil bedste tandbørste. Testvinder ifølge Testfakta.
Now let's move further. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 12 hours, 24 hours, we received lots of updates. First of all, the Russians were bombing the city of Zaporozhye with aviation. Lots of aviation strikes were recorded, and these are the consequences of these attacks. As you can see, several warehouses and probably ammo depots, logistic hubs were completely destroyed and reduced to ruins. And the Russians are attacking the city of Zaporozhye while the Ukrainians are trying to carry out a counter-offensive operation in the direction of the settlements of Stepnogorsk and Kamenskaya. Tomorrow we will adjust the map, probably because this evening we received report that the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions once again, and that the Ukrainians are beginning the battle for the Stepnogorsk. This is going to be already the second battle for the village. The Ukrainians actively redeployed their reinforcements and reserves in the direction of this western Zaporozhye direction, but the Russians have established certain fire and FPV drone control over the territory, and the Russians don't allow the Ukrainians to bring their fresh forces to the line of combat contact. So all these updates confirm that something big is happening right now in this area. The Russians are tasked to repel the Ukrainian upcoming attacks, and the Ukrainians are tasked to force the Russians to fall back from this area with the purpose to create a buffer zone to the south of the city of Zaporozhye, because the Ukrainians understand that the Russians probably have big chances, or at least some chances, to break through the defenses of the city of Zaporozhye and even to answer the settlement itself, which is going to be the biggest media loss for the armed forces of Ukraine and personally for the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. At the same time, the clashes continue along the line of the villages Gulyai Polska, Verkhnya Tersa, Vozdvizhivka, and Rizdvyanka. The Russians approached these villages probably during the November or even December of 2025, so it seems that almost half a year passed since the beginning of the battle for these villages, and we see that the Russians haven't managed to establish strong control even over a single village in this area, which which means that the Ukrainians understand the value of these settlements, and the Ukrainians are trying to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Russians to break through these defenses, because if it happens, and if the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, are able to take under complete control this defense line of the eastern Zaporozhye direction, so we're talking about these territories, then most likely we can say that the entire Zaporozhye direction, defenses of Zaporozhye direction collapse automatically without any chances to save control over the city of Orekhov, and probably from these positions the Russians would be able to get closer to the city of Zaporozhye and even to establish partial artillery control over the settlement, which in the end will force the civilians of the city to fall back from this area. Meanwhile, the Russians continue attacking not just the city of Zaporozhye, but the settlement to the north, the city of Dnipro. We have videos of consequences of attack. The offensive operation, the Russian offensive operation in this area intensifies, as you can see. And another important thing, that the city of Kryvyi Rog is also under very heavy fire, and today several trains and locomotives were destroyed. And pro-Ukrainian sources stated that one of the biggest enterprises of Ukraine in the area of the city of Kryvyi Rog halted its operation due to the logistic crisis that the Russians managed to develop in this area. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Now let's discuss the situation in the Middle East, because it's